Hello, welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, Rob. As you can probably see, though, today I have actually a guest star. Today I'm talking to Rob Vera from the Philippines. Some of you might recognize him. He actually leaves a lot of comments in my videos. He's a long-time viewer of my channel and a bunch of other channels as well, and plays a lot of Sorcerer and has listed a lot of different builds that I've liked over time. So I kind of wanted to have him on my channel. We could just talk some Sorcerer since I've been playing a Sorcerer lately. It's been kind of an interest to me, and I figured I'd talk to him and just get like different perspective as well, of course, because I have ways I like to do things, but other people have ways they like to do things. And in my opinion, that's one of the things I love about D&D. There's no like right way or wrong way. There's always multiple options to get the job done. So I figured I'd talk to you. How are you doing today, Rob?
All right, thanks for having me, Rob. So, hi everybody for tuning in to Rob's channel. So again, my name is also Rob, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So I figured I'd ask you why Sorcerer. I know you said Sorcerer is your favorite class, and I was wondering like why that might be.
All right, so there are a few reasons. So I'm going to name three. So number one, I really liked how sorcerers are easily adaptable to, let's say, different situations. All right, not unlike a wizard would have to prepare spells, but if they run out of a certain spell they need, they're done for. They can't adapt. Sorcerers would be able to just keep using the spells that they need for a specific situation because they just rely on their spells known and they can just repeat cast all of them. And in case that they, run out of the spell slots that they need, let's say, for example, 5th level, they want to cast Synaptic Static. All right, they want to cast it again, but they're out of 5th level slots. They can just easily create a new 5th level slot using Font of Magic. So that's the first reason. Second reason is I actually liked that, the sorcerer is capable of altering their spells to, basically create, let's say, spell combos, be able to adjust to, the different enemies on the map. Like perhaps, let's say, an enemy is immune to fire. Right, a wizard, if they prepared fireball, they just have to shoot a fireball and you're done with it, right? They're going to go through resistance. A sorcerer can transmute that fireball, let's say, to thunderball, lightning ball, just to be able to get past resistance, right? So again, that's something that I like. So meta magic is another big reason why I like sorcerers. And lastly, there's also for the role play or thematic aspects of it. So, because when you think of a wizard, again, I'm sorry for comparing wizards and sorcerers, but that's
okay.
A common comparison.
It's the most logical comparison, to be honest. So.
Right. So wizards are pretty much, they study to learn their magic. And that's it. Your backstory is about that. It's always about studying, growing up in a school or a monastery, or being taught by a mentor and then you're an apprentice.
Yeah, it's Harry Potter.
Sorcerer can do all of that, right? But they can also be born with their power, like, let's say, mutants, right? Let's say from the X-Men universe. They could be able to, let's say, get their power from a divine being, like a divine soul. It could be passed on through some mythical creatures like dragons. And yeah, that's why you have a draconic sorcerer. It could be, let's say, they're getting their power, let's say, from another plane, like the Shadow Sorcerer, coming from the Shadowfell or from the Raven Queen. You could see that the role-play thematics that you could come up with coming, let's say, from wizards, warlocks, and clerics. They could all mix them in through the sorcerer because the sorcerer's power is innate. It can come in from anywhere. So those are the three main reasons why I enjoy playing sorcerer.
Cool. I actually like a lot of the roleplay aspects of Sorcerer as well. I've said many times Warlock's my favorite. Everybody who's watched this channel knows that. But Sorcerer is like way up there on my list. And one of the things that you just said, what I really gel with as well, is that I think it's a lot easier to make an interesting sorcerer where, like I said, you've inherited this power through your bloodline somehow, like even divine soul. Like maybe it wasn't even granted to you from a divine being. Maybe you have some sort of like angelic being in your family lineage somewhere, and that power has been like passed down, right? Like I said, like the draconic bloodline, all these kind of things, right? Ever in mind, you hear these whisperings from this other realm and stuff, and there's things like being born under a certain star. Like to me, that really captures a lot of the feeling that a lot of like fiction and like anime type stuff has all had, where you have a person who there's something weird or different about them and they're like cursed or they're special or whatever, and then a lot of it can be maybe they don't even know why, but they're trying to figure out like where did this power come from, type of thing, right? And that just makes for a lot of interesting stuff. Because like I said, wizard, I like wizards too. Wizards are probably the best overall class of the game. You get the ritual casting, you've got the best spell list, but like you said, like it's I read a book and learned magic, and I've studied and gone to school, and it's like that could be cool, but the sorcerer is just so much more open. Plus,
right, it's more diverse.
Yeah, and like you said, I really like the way that meta magic can change what you do. Just one of the reasons I love multi-classing with sorcerers so much, right? You take someone like a paladin who has, good melee abilities, but their spell casting is rather limited, and you're usually stuck where you're either going to attack or cast a spell. But if you're paladin plus sorcerer, you're like, I'm going to attack, and I'm going to quicken cast a spell. I'm just going to do both. I'm going to quicken cast a bless, and now I'm going to attack with the advantage of bless on me and my party members, right? I'm going to quicken cast this, I'm going to quicken cast that, and like, the cleric's like, I'm going to cast spirit guardians, and moving close, and the paladin,
and then stop.
yeah, exactly, and the paladin sorcerer is like, I'm going to quicken cast spirit guardians, move in, melee attack, and I'm just going to drop a couple smites on my attacks while I'm doing it all, So it's like the divine soul sorcerer is like, thanks cleric, I'll take that, and I'll take this from sorcerer, I'll take that from cleric, and I'll take this from paladin, and, it's so much more customizable. And like you said, the meta magic really just broadens your horizons for what you can do as a sorcerer.
I think it opens up a lot of play styles as well. So because you're able to adjust the spells to the situation. Let's say normally a wizard, unless it's an abjurer, you can't really tank. Sorcerers, you can easily cast, let's say, a spell that ups your defenses, and then let's say quicken cast still an offensive cantrip, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if, let's say, you're multi-class with warlock. And another reason to actually think of different combinations, quicken spell just opens up so many options for you. Let's say you want to be a peace cleric. Now you can use emboldening bond and then still quicken the spell. And now you're like the ultimate support. You can like emboldening bond your party and then quicken haste.
Yeah.
So there's so many combos that you can pull off. You could say that sorcerers are the combo class.
Yeah, I think that's actually
very accurate. A lot of
accurate.
fantasy tropes, actually. So if you think about it, when we look at fantasy and anime, you could think of, let's say martial characters. It's very common in anime. The big hero always has a sword. Right? So, and then usually have some sort of magic effect that comes with it. When you're playing a paladin, it doesn't feel like that, right? Because it's just damage. But it feels more like that when you're able to, let's say, swing your sword and then cast a spell. It just creates that fantasy trope, that fantasy feeling when you're fighting. So that's another main reason for, again, sorcerers being, I think, the most adaptable class when it comes to thematics, to roleplay, compared to the other, let's say, caster classes.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate. So as you probably already know, I've been playing an Avid Mind Sorcerer lately. So instead of covering like just everything Sorcerer, we can do that in future videos or whatever. That's probably too much for one video. Right. I figured we could talk more specifically about Avid Mind, because you made some comments on my video, and just for anybody who, I know but for anybody watching who maybe didn't watch that video, the basic concept is I'm going to take a bunch of Avid Mind Sorcerer levels with a couple levels of Warlock, and I want to be able to use some of these persistent effects and then use Repelling Blast to push guys in, right? So like Hunger of Hadar is on the Avid Mind spell list already. Evil's Black Tentacles is on the spell list, right? Use those kind of spells like Web, Sickening Radiance, whatever else, right? And so the problem with those spells I usually have is that they're really good when you first cast them. But then guys just move out and they've kind of run their course. They don't really have a lot more functionality anymore. So my idea was to push them back in, try to get more usefulness out of it. And I remember you making some comments on it. And one thing I wanted to ask you was like, what kind of things do you like to do as a sorcerer? Like, how would you maybe take my idea and improve it or tweak it? Or just what would you do instead? Because there's nothing wrong with doing something completely different as well, right?
Sure. So we can discuss all of those things, but we'll probably do them in order. So I think the first one that we could talk about is how I would make it better. So I think, again, the concept is fun. Again, it would remind me, let's say, of other, content creators, let's say, who would create like forced movement builds where like they push, things through spike growth. That's pretty common, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same concept here. I think what needs to be clearer is that what spell are you using? Is it adaptable to a lot of situations that you may encounter? And if it's not, for those situations, what's your backup?
Mhm.
Right? So that's one. That would help you at least kind of like tweak your spell list to be able to handle more situations because you have your bread and butter, and then the others are just either defensive spells, utility spells, or encounters.
Yeah.
And then second is that perhaps yeah you could push them back in, but once you have like your first turn is done. Let's say your first turn is let's say Hunger of Hadar, right? Hunger of Hadar, quicken Hunger of Hadar, and then you would repelling blast somebody in. What are you doing in the second turn? So if you're just sticking to I'm going to repelling blast everybody back in, it's going to be not scalable because
Mhm.
everybody's just going to go out, come back in. You want to have to do something that's going to help them, make it more difficult to go back out. One spell I would
Tasha's
consider, not
Mind Whip.
specifically for Aberrant Mind. Yeah, Mind Whip is one, right, which we will discuss later. But I
Okay.
wanted to touch on something that's not on the Aberrant Mind list. I'm
Okay.
going to discuss that later. Grease. So Grease is a non-concentration spell that creates difficult terrain, which you already have with Hunger of Adar and Black Tentacles. But it also, forces people who stay there to save or go prone. So once you were able to push them back in, and then they fail save to go prone, it's now more difficult for them to go back out. So you have an easier time putting them back in. So your second turn would be like quick and grease, and then repelling
Push them
blast
back in
again.
again. That's a great idea because the other thing with prone is it takes half their movement just to stand up. So it's kind of like a difficult terrain thing, but it's causing it a different effect almost, right? Where like, it is causing difficult terrain, but it's like a different layer of issues for them where now they're already dealing with difficult terrain and now they're losing half their movement. So even if they dash, they probably can't even get out after losing half their movement and difficult terrain.
Or just a few feet outside, that it's easier to push them back in.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot.
So that's one. And then, of course, you already mentioned Tasha's Mind Whip. So Tasha's Mind Whip is more of action denial. So you remove their capability to dash. Because most likely, if they're choosing, they have to choose between a bonus action, and then a movement, right?
Yeah.
So if they're already inside, they're just going to take away their bonus action. They're going to take away their action. They're going to choose to move out rather than suffer damage. And because of that, they can't dash. Again,
Exactly.
it's easier to put them back in. Right? And of course, I'll be discussing some other aberrant mind specific spells that could help with the action denial concept. All right, and I think the last thing that you could add, of course, is to add stuff more in your invocations. So, if, as you said, this is a Warlock, primarily aberrant mind, but you'll be dipping
Yeah.
into Warlock, right? So, couple of things. So I think for another invocation, if you decide to add more Warlock levels, or if you pick up Eldritch Adept, you could pick up Lance of Lethargy. That's another 10-foot reduction to the speed.
I'd thought about that one as well. Because
That's one.
I'd also thought about Grasp of Vidar so I could pull guys, but then you're looking at, you're looking at, like you said, either taking feats or taking a lot more Warlock levels. But that's all right, though. Because I do think
you can balance it.
I also think that these ideas are worth exploring because somebody watching this channel, maybe they don't want to multi-class. Maybe they're just like, well, couldn't I just do this as a warlock? And then you do have less spell slots to work with, but you would have more options for your Eldritch Blast. And so if your plan is to I'm going to just drop my Hunger of Dar, and that's going to be what I concentrate on, and then I'm not really going to use a lot of other spell slots. I'm mostly just going to push guys back with Eldritch Blast, and I'm going to slow them because I've got Lance of Lethargy as well, and I could pull a guy if he moves the other direction because I've got Grasp of Fire. I think that works quite well for a Warlock as well. You do have less options in any given encounter, but, that's just Warlock,
Yeah, I think you have two major tactics here. It's either you're going with mostly forced movement and speed reduction, or you're going with action denial. If you're going to be leaning more towards Warlock, you remove action denial because you probably won't have slots to cast one of the spells I'm talking about later, and Tasha's Mind Whip, or Grease. You won't have the slots to cast all of those.
Exactly.
Right? You're limited to cantrips. So another thing I remember for the Warlock, so in case you move to level 3, you get to pick a pact. So the pact that I would suggest would be Pact of the Chain. So this gives you a familiar, but unlike other familiars, this could give you a familiar that's flying with hands.
Yeah, like an Emperor Quasit.
Right. And
Usually, but
what's good about this is that even if like your DM is stingy with magic items or what can familiars do or not do, for sure your DM's gonna allow them to interact with an object. You could easily pick up either caltrops, which is very cheap, or ball bearings. And if you already have grease layered down, and you can, let's say, send your familiar to just fly over the Hunger of Adar or the Black Tentacles and then just drop either ball bearings or caltrops in the area. Again, further hindering them from moving out. So it's now, a big issue for them. How are they spending their? You're pretty much going to be trapped there. It's either you're saving against caltrops, ball bearings, or prone. And then if they ever get out, they're still going to be pushed back into the caltrops, back onto the ball bearings, back onto the grease. So again, that helps again layer your different ways of speed reduction or perhaps action denial.
Excellent. I hadn't even thought about that. That is a great suggestion.
Or I don't know if your DM is lenient. Maybe you can have your familiar carry the hunting trap, the bear trap. I don't know what it's called, but the trap that's in the PHB, right? You could have them lay down the trap inside Hunger of Adar and just fly back out, and then maybe somebody steps on it once they get pushed onto it. Right? It's again another layer of defenses, and then your action economy is not compromised because your familiar is doing this own set of actions, their own set of movement and action.
Yes.
Right, and you're still free to do what you're doing spellcasting.
I like that suggestion a lot, actually. That's pretty good.
All right, so anyway, I think so we talked about forced movement, right? And then of course, not really the main topic of the video, but if you were to think, okay, Rob, I don't want to do the whole forced movement into a persistent controlled / damage effect aberrant mind. What are my other options? Right, so aberrant minds, of course, they excel at control, right? That's their number one thing. But if you wanted to, you could also play them as a summoner. Mm-hmm. So their 4th level spell, Summon Aberration, which is kind of unique compared to other sorcerers. You don't get access to this. Gives you a lot of other options when it comes to how you want to play your aberrant mind. Perhaps you want to set up somebody who's going to be able to tank for the party. So you're just going to summon a Slat. It's going to be regenerating and be at the front, at the front lines. Perhaps even grappling enemies who are large or smaller. And it has a decent strength score of 16. And then perhaps you want to play a role of a blaster as an aberrant mind. One of the builds that I don't know if anybody has seen in the comments that I've posted was called Ride a Beholder, wherein you pick up a summon aberration, you pick up a beholder, you cast it ahead of time. Feel free to extend spell it. Again, it depends on how your DM runs.
I was going to suggest that, yeah.
Right, and then of course, as a small aberrant mind sorcerer, you can ride the medium beholder. And I don't know about you, but it looks cool. Let's say you're a goblin or a Harangon or a kobold riding a beholder, and then that beholder's firing eye rays at from 50, 60 feet in the air while you're firing Eldritch Blast. That just sounds like a lot of fun. And of course, very safe, unless the enemy is flying, they can't touch you.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it doesn't require a lot of other things. You're free to do whatever you want with your spell list. Let's say you want to just be a blaster in combat, but you want to focus your aberrant mind, let's say, for doing utility things outside of combat. Because your spell selection is free, you're just picking one spell and maybe one cantrip, right? You just need Eldritch Blast, one invocation. After that, you're free to pick whatever you want.
Yeah.
And this, again, adds to the versatility. Perhaps you want to be the face of the party. That works. You can customize your spell selection just for that, which I'll talk about later as well.
Well, and aberrant mind does get things like detect thoughts, calm emotions, things like that work very well as that party face type role. So, and then of course your charisma already is your main stat, so you're very well suited for that kind of role. And like I said, you can do both those things. I just love the idea of flying around on a beholder, especially since I believe the beholder has a hover speed as well, which makes it very safe to fly on, right? So.
Yeah, you're pretty much just worrying about anybody who just has rage attacks. So those will be your first targets. So it's either casters or archers. After that, if it's all melee, you can pretty much solo an encounter because they're not going to ever touch you. And then you're just firing off Eldritch Blasts and Beholder eye rays. And again, if you create artwork for it, it's just going to be, look cool. Right? So, anyway, moving on to spell selection. Again, and what roles do these spells play in terms of customizing your aberrant mind. So first off, we have to keep in mind the key abilities for aberrant mind. I'm not going to discuss like the level 14 or level 18 abilities.
Fair
As
enough.
we discussed previously, most campaigns are not really going to go past 13, 14. So we're just going to pay attention to the level 1 ability and the level 6. All right, so level 1 I think is pretty easy. It allows you to communicate telepathically, which is great when you are using spells that either suggest, command, charm, an NPC, because you're able to communicate your commands, your suggestions, without giving it away to any observers or other NPCs. All right, so that's one. And two, I think the big ability here, all right, is the psionic sorcery. So for
Yes.
psionic sorcery, it gives you when you choose spells for this one, you have kind of like two paths. Number one, am I choosing spells for combat? And then psionic sorcery assists that by cutting in your costs. Normally, when you cast spells, and then when you run out, and then you have to convert, let's say your lower slots to sword points, it loses, right? It
Yeah.
kind of like end up with a net loss.
Yeah, it's not a very
Right.
good conversion.
Right, it's not efficient. However, with the aberrant mind, as long as you're using divination or enchantment, you're going to be able to do it for a one-for-one basis. So if you choose your spells that you would use for combat a lot, like what we mentioned earlier, let's say like Tasha's Mind Whip, which is an excellent spell. I love that spell.
And you
Then
mentioned
basically you're
you mentioned
using the
synaptic
sword
static earlier too, which is another
synaptic
great
static.
choice. Yeah.
Right, you could actually play a blaster slash controller hybrid aberrant mind that's very cost efficient, and then you could just keep converting on spell slots you don't use, perhaps let's say third level slots or first level slots, into the spell slots that you do use, which are like second and fifth. Right, and then you just keep using it again. Unlike let's say a wizard or a bard, once they finish their first level, or sorry, their first slot or their second, fifth level slot, they're out of synaptic statics. You can do like maybe like 3 synaptic statics in a combat, and you're not gonna feel it. This just costs like 5 sorcery points, which is equivalent to a third level spell.
Yeah.
So you're actually gaining a lot of let's say profit in a sense, right?
Yeah. That was
So
one of
that's
the things.
one option.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say that was one of the things I talked about in my last video because I always kind of like I hadn't played the Aberrant Mind. I still haven't played Clockwork, so I realized that I probably don't have a fair rating of both because I haven't played both. But I'd always kind of felt like Sonic Sorcery was a pretty good ability. I thought it was like a 6.5, 7 out of 10 type ability, right? And then then I started using it. I'm like, holy cow! Like this ability is amazing. It's maybe the best subclass ability of any of the sorcerer subclasses. Like some of the other aberrant mind abilities are pretty good too, but like that one, like I was seriously underrating how good it was because you still have your 5th level slots or 3rd or 4th or whatever level slot. Like, let's go back to the summon aberration. Let's say you wanted to ride around on the beholder, right? I like that idea.
Right.
So you still have your 4th level spell slots that you could be using to cast summon aberration, but then like you said, you can be converting like maybe not all your 1st and 2nd and 3rd level spell slots, because you may be like, I want to cast shield a couple times probably, maybe I need like a misty step or a mirror image maybe once, and I'm probably going to want a couple slots for counterspell. But you could easily convert like a couple of each or one of each and have way more spell slot or way more sorcery points, convert those into more uses of summon aberration, and instead of casting it like twice a day or whatever a normal sorcerer is going to get at your level, you could be doing that 4 times, 5 times, 6 times maybe. Like it's crazy.
When it dies, you don't really feel bad.
Yeah, and it's not going to die anyway because, like you said, it's flying up in the air, and it's a spell that scales really well too. That's one where if I'm high enough level, I don't have any concerns about using a 6th level spell slot on summon aberration. It's going to be attacking 3 times around now, like. You mentioned the Slad, you mentioned the Beholder, but like the Star Spawn is excellent as well, just doing psychic damage to everything around it, and its melee attacks do psychic damage, which is nice because its attacks don't count as being inherent. Yeah, it's not inherently magical attacks. So if it was just making bludgeoning attacks, it might not be able to hurt some stuff, but it's making psychic attacks. So So yeah, I actually
one of the best damage types.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, it's all right. So anyway, I actually lost my train of thought. What were we talking about earlier?
Sonic spells specifically, and just like
sonic spells.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So psionic sorcery, the first path is what I laid out earlier, like picking your spells which you're going to use in combat, and then of course leveraging off the efficiency of the sword point to spell slot conversion, right? And then using primarily enchantment. Let's be honest, the divination spell selection is not really good. You're going to be choosing enchantment spells.
I mean,
So this is primarily enchantment spells.
you might take something like tongues, right? I can see it.
Yeah, but that's for the other side.
Yes,
The other
yes.
side is choosing something, let's say, for role play or social challenge.
Yes, exactly.
So it's up to you, the player, how you want to do it. You could, let's say, perhaps just pick combat spells, which I don't think is really efficient, because you're not going to need all of them. Again,
Yeah.
the sorcerer excels at picking a tool and then making it better and making it adaptable to all situations. It's not like a wizard where you can choose like different spells for every occasion. Usually you'll pick like your pet spells or your favorite spells, or I'd like to call it your signature spells. And then you're just using that, and you become
Yeah,
known for
but-
that. Which you can also
But that got
carry
trademarked
on to
by
roleplay,
Wizards,
by the
so.
way.
Uh,
Yeah. I'm just creating names.
I know. I like that approach too, because this is something I talked about when I made one of my Solok videos that I was talking about recently. I was talking about how I'm planning on taking Sickening Radiance on this character just because nobody at my party's ever taken it before, and I want to use it. But I fully realize I don't really need it, right? It's kind of doing the same job as Hunger of Hadar and Ivar's Black Tentacles, right? It's kind of in that same vein. But it is radiant damage and it's causing exhaustion, so it's a little different. And mostly I just think it's a cool spell. But my point is, there'd be no point taking, those three plus Wall of Fire plus like 2 or 3 more. Like, you don't need 6 different spells that are all doing the same thing. You need
Exactly.
a couple. And it's like, okay, well, Black Tentacles causes darkness, or causes restraint. Hunger of Hadar is causing the darkness and difficult terrain, and it has a bigger radius, right? So it affects more targets potentially. And then you've got the one that's doing radiant, which is probably the best damage type of all of these ones that for those 3 at least, better than cold or acid, and it's causing exhaustion. So it's like you've got some differences, but then I'm going to be using Eldritch Blast, so it's basically going to be like comboing Eldritch Blast plus some sort of battlefield denial, right? But you don't need like 8 different battlefield denial spells. You need a couple go-tos. And I think, that's what you kind of talk about with Sorcerer, where you don't need to have every spell on the wizard spell list. What you need to have is a couple go-tos that you're going to use over and over again, and then you're even going to like convert sorcery points potentially into more spell slots to reuse those spells again even more, and you're just going to try to like maximize and enhance those certain spells. You're going to heighten spell them, you're going to empower them, you're going to quicken cast them, whatever meta magics you've taken. You're going to say, I'm going to choose these main spells, and I'm just going to use them a lot, and I'm going to make them as good as I can possibly make them. And to me, that's kind of cool.
And it leaves room for utility spells. Let's say like your Misty Steps, defensive spells like Counter Spells, Shield, and of course, if you want to take spells primarily for roleplay, there might be certain days at a table where there's 0 combats.
Yep.
You just have to go through social encounters. If everything that you selected is just for combat, then you're doing nothing.
Exactly.
Right? You're not a rogue. You don't have expertise.
Yeah.
Right? So you better have something to do that's non-combat related. And being able to modify this with psionic sorcery, where in this time it turns whatever spell you're casting into subtle spells. Not only is this useful for outside of combat, because let's say you can counterspell and it can't be counterspelled, right? But it also allows you to, let's say, do a lot of persuasion or deception with, using spells, and then, of course, not being detected and getting away with it. Right?
Yeah.
Which, again, helps you, let's say, circumvent certain NPCs, perhaps that your DM may, choose to include in the conversation.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, we specifically have, detect thoughts, for example, is on the spell list. And like you said, being able to detect thoughts usually is pretty good, but being able to subtle cast detect thoughts and nobody knows you're doing it is just 10 times better. You could be in the tavern and just cast and detect thoughts on people, just doing it with subtle casting from your sonic spell list.
All right, and now we get into my first quick tip or reminder regarding psionic sorcery. Most people think this is subtle spell. No, this is better than subtle spell. Why? Well, first, there's no sword point cost. The second thing that's critical is that it removes material components.
Yes.
You know that summon aberration that you have like this 400 gold I think item that you needed to have, right? Like as a spell component that's gone. So pretty much, and if you multi-class into a class where and you wanted to use, let's say, a wand or a weapon and then a shield, like you somehow get shield proficiency,
Oh, like
you can just
Hexblade.
do that, right? Because you don't need material components anymore.
Exactly.
Any spell that's from your psionic sorcery list doesn't require any component, visual and somatic and material. There's no need to go through your component pouch or through your components,
Yeah.
right? So again, free warcaster in a sense.
Yes. Like you said, if we're going, we're talking specifically about multi-classing with like Warlock, you could have gone Hexblade, and now you've got shield proficiency, right? So that is something that could come up for you. That could be a big deal. You want to use a shield. You're a soft, squishy caster. Might as well be casting in half plate and a shield instead of piece of cloth.
Exactly. And then of course that free, your other hand, it frees it up to, let's say, keep using, say, the Rod of the Pack Keeper if your DM gives it to you, or simply just having a nice weapon, perhaps a finesse weapon, in case it's gonna rarely happen, but maybe somebody moves out of your threatened reach, then you can maybe do an opportunity attack if you wanted to. That's not going to be like pathetic damage. So again, it gives you options, right? So that's one of the good things about Psionic Sorcery. So before we get to the spell list, it's actually at first level, but kind of goes from first to ninth. There's another ability that's, I think, going to give you resistance to psychic damage and advantage on saves against Charmed and Frightened, if I'm remembering correctly.
That is correct.
Nice bonuses, but not really critical to building. But still, when they do happen, and you'll be thankful that you have them. So, the way I'd like to do this is go through maybe 2 or 3 options, maybe 3, just to give everybody some options per level. So from 1 through 5, and then I'll talk about use cases for each spell, and then whether it's applicable, let's say, to your build specifically as well. So I want to start off with what's already on the spell list. That's Dissonant Whispers. So what's great about this? So just again, you're a squishy caster, right? Unless of course you did Hexblade, but not everybody wants to do Hexblade. So this is an option for you to actually get out of dodge. You can deal damage, get out of dodge for the cost of 1 sorcery point, right? And of course, if you use psionic sorcery, it's on your list, then you can actually just do it even with shield and a weapon, right? And then your opponent who would move away would provoke an opportunity attack, and you are free to take it if you want to. You can whack them with a weapon if you want to, all right? And what's good about this is that even if, let's say, they make their save and then they don't move away, still dealing damage. So the save here, all right. Actually, no. Let me correct myself. Actually, I just double checked it. It's the damage is only on a failed save. So
Yeah, I think that too, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I had to double check. But anyways, it's still good because it's non-concentration. It's first level. There's not really a lot of spells competing for your first level slot aside, let's say, from shield or absorb elements.
Yeah.
And again, it gives you a way to disengage without needing to use a second level slot, let's say, for a Misty Step. Alright, so I think that's a use for it. This is a combat spell. This is something that you'd use as, let's say, you're running low on sword points and you just want to get some damage in, or you needed to disengage, or perhaps you have a party member who's in melee, like, say, your barbarian, your fighter, your ranger, free opportunity attacks for everybody.
I was going to say that as well. Specifically, if you have like a rogue in your party in melee range, he could sneak attack again on your turn instead of just on his own, right? So, if you have, let's say you have, let's say like a swashbuckler rogue, for example, and maybe you got a barbarian, but it's a melee rogue, melee barbarian, you could provoke 2 opportunity attacks on the same target, which is going to be way more damage than like a chromatic orb or a magic missile spell would probably do at that same spell slot, because they're both going to be able to attack the target, both hit them, and especially if the rogue's getting in a sneak attack, that's going to be probably a lot more damage than your first level spell slot would have done as a combat spell. Plus, you're doing some damage, assuming you fail to save it through, of course, on top of all that.
Exactly. And it's uncounterable, so just in case your GM likes to put spellcasters in their campaigns, pretty much as an aberrant mind sorcerer, you don't care about counterspell. As long as you stick to your psionic sorcery list, you don't have to worry about counterspell ever. So, and tying this again to the alternative build I mentioned earlier, if, let's say, instead of you didn't want to ride a beholder, you think that's boring, you wanted to use a slat or a star spawn, you could have them go into melee range, right? And then cast on your first turn of combat, cast Dissonant Whispers. If they fail a save, automatically the slat or the star spawn gets a free opportunity attack. Right, again, extra damage. And of course, the star spawn can also move up to the enemy again and still get in their normal number of attacks. So you're getting 3 attacks for the cost of 1 spell for a first level spell. That's pretty good efficiency.
Yeah, I like it too.
Alright. So we'll move on now to more on the other side, utility spells. So first that I'm going to mention, Charm Person. So I think this is a maligned spell. I don't know, other channels have mentioned that this is one of the worst first level spells. Alright, but again, we're looking at the Divine and the Enchantment list only for Psionic Sorcery, and there's not a lot of good choices for first level. So I'm taking this one for one purpose. It's just to allow you to get advantage on social interactions in case you're willing to burn a spell slot. And you can do it again with subtle spell, meaning NPCs will not detect it. They're not gonna know that you casted Charm Person on them, and you're still getting your advantage on your persuasion, deception, intimidation rolls.
That's what I was gonna say to you. I think the problem that people have with Charm Person is that people, after it runs out, they know that you cast it on them. But I think with subtle casting, at least as a DM, I would rule it that they know somebody used some sort of charm spell on them, but they don't know who, because it was subtle cast. So that's how I would do it, where they realize they must have been under some sort of charm effect, but they don't know who cast it. And,
exactly.
Maybe you're the only person they interacted with. They might figure out it's you anyway, but maybe you're not. Maybe it's a big group setting, and, it makes the spell a lot more useful than it normally would be. And I actually don't think it's a bad spell anyway. I think the advantage on it, especially if it's just in a quick, one-shot thing, and then we can get out of here. By the time they find out they've been charmed, it might not matter. In some situations, it could come back to bite you. So, you got to be careful for it. But like you said, the first level spell slot, they're not that powerful.
Right.
Your options are limited. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, and then the last option I'm going to talk about for first level is Hex. So, yes, it's traditional for Warlocks who would use it for Eldritch Blast. Of course, for your build, we're not talking about using our concentration for Hex. I'm talking about Hex here as an out-of-combat pick. So, why? Because most people, when they look at Hex, they just look at the extra damage and attacks, the extra necrotic. We're not paying attention to that. We're paying attention to the disadvantage on ability checks. So, how does it help you out of combat as an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer? Perhaps, let's say, you are trying to deceive somebody, right? You're already trying to, let's say, gain advantage by charming that person. You're trying to do a deception check. Might as well, you're not using your concentration outside of combat, might as well cast Hex on your bonus action. And then, of course, implement an disadvantage on wisdom checks, which would mean their insight checks.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have disadvantage to detect that you're lying, and then you have advantage to lie.
Or even if you're
if you're using Charm Person.
Maybe you're trying to make some sort of opposed barter test or something. You could then subtle cast Hex, and now they've got disadvantage on their charisma check, and you don't, and you've got pretty good charisma, so it's a lot more likely that you're going to be able to persuade them and stuff. I was going to say, I even think that it does have a certain level range where I think it's very valuable as a damage buff as well. Because even if you did, let's say you went Warlock, or let's say you didn't, doesn't really matter, right? At that low level range, Firebolt just doesn't do much. It's just not particularly good, right? So if you've only got first level spell slots anyways, and you're just casting Firebolt a bunch because you don't want to spend all your spell slots on every single fight, just being like a Warlock and hexing somebody and adding a bit of damage to your Firebolt isn't bad at low levels, right? Once you get to, once it starts scaling better, it starts getting a lot better with Warlock because you're getting multiple bolts, which you might not get if you're not multi-classing. But by now you've got other things you can be concentrating on anyways. Hex is kind of run its usefulness, I think. But I think that, like I said, I think that there's some really good out-of-combat uses that you just pointed out. And I think that even in that, level 1 to 4 type character level, I think it does have a nice little damage boost.
Right. You're not getting Hunger of Adar until, Let's say
Five.
5. So
Yeah.
pretty much for 1 to 4,
Yeah.
this is your concentration pick, right?
Yeah.
And then as you progress, it becomes more of an out of combat spell. And if you don't like it, you can easily just
Swap it out again. Yeah,
as if you
exactly.
did a sorcerer. So
Exactly.
another good use for this one, let's say your party likes to uh, do like a stealth approach. You can also again hex somebody, like a guard, a lieutenant or whatever, and then hex again their wisdom checks for perception. So you can easily sneak past. Again, there's a lot of out of combat applications. For those early level applications, combat wise, aside from damage, you could perhaps hex strength. If you're facing, let's say, a monster that grapples, now you just kind of like really nerfed their ability to grapple you or your party members, right? And your frontliner is going to thank you.
Yeah.
So, again, those are great applications for hex.
You're fighting a giant octopus. All they do is grapple. Now suddenly he's got disadvantage on it.
Exactly. All right, so I'm going to pause here. This is for first level. Did you have questions or things that you were curious about?
No, I think it's going quite well so far. I'm really liking a lot of your suggestions and insight here.
Awesome. So I hope our viewers are enjoying as well. Let's move on to second level spells. So I'll start off with the one we already mentioned earlier, which is Detect Thoughts. Right, so I think you hit the nail on the head already. This is great for roleplay. This is great for gaining information from the DM, especially if you have a DM that allows you to kind of like use a lot of these other like ritual spells like divination, augury, commune, and you can get more information based on the information you get from the person that you cast a detective thoughts on. I think this is great for role play or advancing the story. Or if as a DM, like for me as a DM, I love it when I get an excuse to exposition dump on the player. Right? You don't have to find anything or unlock anything. I can just tell them what's the lore, what's supposed to happen.
Exactly.
Right?
You spent all that time world building. You want to show it off a little bit. Yeah.
Exactly.
We've all been there. Yeah.
And again, the key part here is it's uncounterable, and nobody's going to know you're using it. And you don't carry its concentration because out of combat, you're probably not concentrating on anything anyway.
Exactly.
All right. Another one that we already mentioned earlier, which is great for action denials, is a combat spell, Tasha's Mind Whip. So arguably one of my favorite spells in the game. So what's great about it is, number one, it's an intelligence saving throw. So unless you're going up against legendary saves, it's going to push through. Even through magic resistance. The numbers just work out that it's going to power through magic resistance. So even if your monster has advantage, they're going to fail at intelligence saving throw. And then, of course, what's great about this is that it's action denial. It gives them only one of either move, action, or bonus action. We already talked about how it's good for your build. And unlike Dissonant Whispers, now I'm correct on this one, even if they make their save, for some reason they roll high or a natural 20, they're still taking half damage.
Yes. And it scales quite nicely, too. You can upcast it and hit multiple targets.
Exactly, which saves you on Twin Spell.
Exactly. Twin Spell is incredibly expensive. Awesome. I really like Twin Spell, but having used it in the past, I'm not planning on taking it on this build because it requires so many sorcery points.
Yeah.
And I'm planning on using those sorcery points to cast my Sonic spells more. So,
Exactly. And this helps you kind of like save on that cost.
Exactly.
It's just basically one sword point to twin it in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And then if you wanted to hit more targets, then it's just like another sword point again, as long as they're within 30 feet of each other.
Yeah.
You can just upcast it to 4th. So the last one is an out of combat spell that I'm taking, but some people would say this is a combat spell, and that's Suggestion. I think you also mentioned this already earlier. So why am I picking Suggestion primarily for out of combat? Most of the out of combat spells that the sorcerer has access to usually involves conversation. Usually it's for social challenges. Either you're turning, let's say with calm emotions. You mentioned calm emotions. They turn somebody who's hostile into indifferent. Perhaps with charm person or dominate person, you are convincing them to do something for you, right? Or for dominate, you're commanding them. Suggestion, unlike, let's say, dominate person, it's lower level, and you achieve the same effect. This time, if they fail to save, they just do what you want them to do, right? So, I think that for combat, maybe at low levels, yes, you could use Suggestion. It's still pretty good. Again, first tier range, but once you get into that fifth level where you go into your forced movement, persistent damage effect, this is not going to be used because it's going to compete for your concentration. So it's primarily for out of combat. You could give instructions that could perhaps help your party go somewhere or unlock something, discover something, or get more information, or perhaps just you could command somebody to assist you like an NPC, right? You now have a sidekick who's going to help you in combat, right? So lots of uses for suggestion. I'm sure there are other videos either talking about this great spell, but primarily for the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, this is an out of combat spell. Again, it helps you use it for role play, for conversation. Do you have any, let's say, stories on how you've used suggestion to great effect in the past, in terms of out of combat use?
I've used it to avoid combat a lot of times, like just persuading people to, you should just let us past or whatever, right? Or, we're here to help, just let us through, that kind of thing. That's how I've mostly used in the past, is just
like
to...
a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah, exactly, just avoid combat, we aren't the humans you're looking for.
You're looking for.
Yeah.
Right. So again, excellent spell. And again, it's cheap, so you're thinking you might want to keep your out of combat spells on the lower side on your spell slots, so at least it's cheap, you don't feel too bad about using it.
Exactly.
And mostly when you put your combat spells on the higher spell slots. Alright, anyway, moving on to third. For third level, I don't have
I was going
much.
to ask you one thing. I noticed you didn't put hold person as one of your options there. Is there any reason for that?
Good catch. So actually, I'm not going to name hold person or hold monster in this list because one of my philosophies, again, as a D&D player, is that I avoid save or suck spells. So why so? Because as you get into higher levels, you're going to encounter higher saving throws, which would lead to wasted actions on your part, or you're going to encounter magic resistance, which would, again, lead to more successes for whatever the DM is rolling. And lastly, you're going to encounter legendary saves, which will just nullify, again, whatever you're trying to do. What's ideal as you go up in levels when it comes to tactics, you use spells that either A, have no save, or at least has an effect that even if they save, there's still something. You get something out of it, right?
Exactly.
Cautious Mind Whip.
Erupting Earth.
Or Erupting Earth is another one, right? Or you're using spell attacks, because as we've discussed before, the enemy's AC as the levels go higher, it kind of plateaus.
Yeah.
So and then your proficiency bonus, your ability, whatever, just goes higher.
Yeah.
So it's more likely to succeed. And then lastly, which I will discuss later on as one of the spells here, you could also target skill checks. Skill checks are something that our monsters have like a low number of.
Yes.
And you're more likely to win. And it's easier for you to boost it as well.
This is, I know Maze is an 8th level spell, so this is kind of an extreme example, but one of the things I love about Maze is that there's no saving throw against it, and then when they get banished to the Maze, it's an intelligence check to escape the Maze.
Right.
So even against things with legendary saving throws, like you can still banish them to the Maze because there's no saving throw against it, and they can't just legendary save their way out because it's not a saving throw to escape, it's an ability check. So, it just makes those kind of spells.
I don't know how you would rule this, but there's a combo with this one. You could use Hex Intelligence and then cast Maze.
Well, I think Maze requires concentration, though.
Oh, it does?
I think so, yeah.
Too bad. That'll be a nice combo. Yeah, we'll have to double check on that one.
But if you had multiple people in your party, though. Yeah, I was going to say, if you had multiple people, you got a Warlock.
So they're never going to get out if they have an intelligence disadvantage.
Yeah, they're just... Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. You had something else to add before we continue?
No, I'm not the biggest fan of Hold Person either. I think the effect is great, and if you take things like Heightened Magic, then Hold Person can actually be pretty good, because the effect is so strong. Like just advantage and auto crits, like you can basically just hold person somebody and then they'd get just destroyed. My big problem, like you said, is that save or suck spells generally start falling off, and the fact that it's limited to humanoids gives you a limited target with a lot of downside. So I don't think it's bad as a second level spell, but it's one that I wouldn't continue to use beyond
get it earlier.
tier 1.
Again, same with like Hex earlier on, right? It returned it into an out of combat spell at a later levels. This one you could play in tier one. Like you could use hold person level 3, level 4.
Yeah.
But when you get to level 5, nah, you have
Yeah.
other concentration choices.
I said, look.
For a couple of levels, you use
But
it,
yeah.
right? But unlike Hex, though, there's no out of combat after.
Yes. And unlike Hex, what if you're not fighting humanoids? Hex, you can still use out of combat. You can use it, like we said, in that tier 1
Right.
damage boost type. If you're in a dungeon, then hold person is going to have very limited usefulness. Maybe you're fighting orcs and kobolds and stuff, and maybe you can use it then. Maybe you're fighting all sorts of weird monsters, and it's never once are you able to cast it. You just don't know. So
Exactly. So, anyway, that's my reason for not picking Old Monster and Old Person. Moving on to third level spells. So for third level spells, I just had 2. So I had like 3 options per level. I had to include like an honorary third one, but I'm not really high on it. I'll mention it last. First one I want to talk about, we already mentioned, is Hunger of Adar. So this is your first like great persistent AoE control / damage effect. So great, again, if you have multi-class to Warlock. What's great about this is, number 1, there's no save. I mean, there's save for damage, but you're not really picking Hunger of Adar primarily for damage.
well, and even then, I think the save for damage only applies to the acid damage, not to the cold damage. So, when you think of the spell, you've got cold damage at the beginning of the round, acid damage at the end of the round, darkness and difficult terrain throughout the entire thing. It's like you're getting no save here, no save at all this stuff, and all you're getting is a save for half damage on the acid.
Like 2d6, which is 1d6.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like it just doesn't matter. It's so minor.
Right. It's an example now of a good no save spell that scales well into higher levels that you could continue using. The question now, though, is that do you want to continue using it after third level spells or fourth level spells, right?
Yeah.
As you gain more options later on.
Exactly.
So, but yes, if you're thinking of what's a good build around spell, Hunger of Adar is one of them. Especially if you have forced movement and you can layer on, let's say, other ways to either action denial, maybe quicken, Conscious Mind Whip, or let's say speed reduction, like your caltrops, ball bearings, lance of lethargy, and of course forced movement.
Or grease, like you mentioned earlier. I love that suggestion. Great idea.
Right. Okay, so, and of course, specifically for Aberrant Minds, I'm not sure if I would advise this on other sorcerers, but one spell that's really great, and it's a combo, is Catnap. I think I mentioned this in your comments. Why so? If you are multi-classed with Warlock, and you have at least Warlock level 3, so you're getting, let's say, level 2 pack slots, it costs you 3 sword points to cast Catnap, which gives you a 10-minute short rest, okay, for you and a couple of other party members. During that short rest, you're going to recover 2 level 2 pack slots. So if you think about it, when you convert those to sword points, you are netting 1 sword point. Cost 3, add 4.
Yeah.
Right, and as you add more Warlock levels, perhaps let's say we went until level 5 Warlock, right? Then now you're getting, let's say, 6 sword points out of converting those pack slots, and you're just spending 3. So now you're netting 3. So this is a great way to gain some, a couple of extra sword points, and then it's not really costing you anything except a spell selection, not even a spell slot, because you're just making it back.
Mm-hmm.
You're just making a spell selection, which at third level there's not a lot of good choices. You have Hunger of Adar, and that's pretty much it. So this is like your second choice, right? And again, if you have monks, you have fighters, you have what are the other short rest classes? So I think those 2 primarily, and warlocks, of course.
Yeah.
And warlocks in the party, right? They're going to be happy. It's a free short rest, right? For as long as your DM is willing to cooperate, because you're unlike, let's say, other short rest spells. This one, it doesn't provide any protection. You're just pretty much sleeping 10 minutes wherever you are. It's a cat nap, right? You could be in an inn or you could be out in the wild. So as long as your DM doesn't suddenly surprise you during that 10-minute rest, you should be good. So again, for this one, I think you probably just need to talk to your DM. If you tell them, I want to take the spell, are you going to keep surprising us if we take like a 10-minute short rest? If he says no, then perfect. Take it. It's a free short rest. If some DMs I know they like to set like limits on how many short rests a party can do in a day, then you could ask them like, does this count, or is it like a free one? Right. So it's something you may need to have a conversation with your DM. But if he allows it, then it's free short rest for everybody and extra sort points for you. It's a win-win. Only for a spell selection. What do you think about that?
It's not too bad. I like it.
Right.
I have my only real problem with catnip is that I find usually the DMs I have usually don't like us to really like abuse short rest too much. Yeah. So, and a lot of times I also find that like if I have 10 minutes for catnip, I probably had an hour for a short rest. It's not that much worse. But again, like if you're in like a dungeon or something, a lot of times your DM might roll for random encounters like every hour. But if you're only resting for 10 minutes and you're getting a short rest, well then you can basically circumvent that issue, not have to worry about it. Especially like if you're short resting, a lot of times it's because maybe the fighter's already used action surge, and maybe he's a battle master and he dropped a bunch of his superiority die on maneuvers already, right? And then the party like doesn't just need a short rest to get that back. They've also maybe lost hit points and they want to spend some of their hit die to recover hit points, right? So you're already maybe low on resources when you take that short rest, and if you get interrupted and attacked, well now you're in even worse shape because you haven't recovered those resources and you're already down a bunch.
Exactly.
And especially if you're in like a dungeon scenario, you might be kind of like budgeting for a certain level of encounters, but then just more encounters on top of that just starts to exponentially make things worse, right? So, in those kind of situations, something like catnip or even like rope trick and stuff like that to get extra rest in can be really, really handy. So, and I think,
or if they say somebody else is doing something during that time, maybe the cleric is casting Aura of Vitality and healing everybody.
prayer of healing.
So while he's spending that time, then everybody's short resting, and he's the one keeping watch.
There you go. I always said about prayer of healing takes 10 minutes to cast, so that's a perfect.
Yeah, prayer of healing. That's another example, right? So while he's doing prayer of healing, he's the one keeping watch. You and a couple of other party members take a short rest.
Yeah. Excellent.
So I think that's something maybe that you can use to convince your DM of why you're taking the catnap spell. The last one I want to say here as an honorable mention is enemies abound. So I'm only mentioning this because some people might not want to play Hunger of Hadar. They might not like the idea of kind of killing the ability for line of sight for their other party members. Maybe they have archers or spell attackers. That's because when you're playing, you have teammates as well. Exactly. And Hunger of Hadar is good for you, bad for your enemies, but it could be bad for your allies as well, because they can't target the ones who are in Hunger of Hadar's area,
exactly,
unless they're using AOE spells, right? Or you're just readying their actions, waiting for them to come out. But that's kind of boring.
Yeah.
So another option here for concentration, at least for this level, is enemies abound. So why am I picking it? Number one, it's an intelligence saving throw. So again, only legendary saves is the one you're worried about. But if high saves because of enemy type or magic resistance, targeting intelligence will always punch through.
Yeah.
So
unless you're fighting a lich, but you're probably not going to cast enemies abound on a lich anyway. You probably have better spells for that.
Yeah, this is for the earlier tiers, like tier 1, tier 2.
Exactly.
So and it's fun. I think you could create a lot of shenanigans with it. Like perhaps you could twin cast it and have like two enemies start fighting each other. And there's also the out of combat use for this one. So out of combat, you want to create a distraction, perhaps so that you could sneak away to a side room, let's say in a castle, or perhaps you want to sneak into the back room of a merchant and pilfer something. Having, let's say, somebody go crazy among, let's say, NPCs or the crowd that...
Oh. Oh, that's not a good sign. It appears that Rob has frozen. Or maybe it's me and my terrible internet.